items for this time with us in this meeting, things that we'd like everyone to abide by. So the first one is stay engaged. This is important discussion, and there's a reason we called this all hands, so we'd love to have everyone's attention. As we're discussing things, we encourage people to speak from your own experiences. As we talk through these things, the stories will stay here amongst us, and the lessons can leave, but we don't want these stories that people share to be repeated. Outside of that, just take the lesson with you. We'd like everyone to suspend judgment of both yourself, but as well as others while we're here. You can practice wait, why am I talking? Especially if you're speaking more than others. The rule of 3 is great for that. Wait for 3 or more people to talk before talking yourself. And of course, work in this space will be from a place of equals. We don't have job titles or ranks here. So with that, I think Bob is speaking next.
Okay. Yeah, so let me do a bit of this acknowledgements on the screen, and you'll see kind of references to some of the work that the people that we're acknowledging here have done as we progress through today. So we'll leave those up on the screen, and I'll just make a few introductory remarks. So IRIS has made a real commitment to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. This is something we are, as an organization, pushing hard on. Our board of directors is 100% behind this. They're encouraging us to push forward in this area. You know, from my own perspective, you know, there are many organizations right now, professional organizations, geoscience organizations and facilities that are trying to address these diversity, equity, and inclusion concerns and to improve the diversity of the geosciences and the STEM fields in general. But I'd like to, you know, I have the hope that our efforts in this space will really be seen as putting us in a leadership role. It's not just something that we can do, but I think it's something we can do extraordinarily well and really be a leader in this area and amongst our peer groups as we push forward into this. And like I say, our board of directors is fully behind us, and I think if we all work together, we really can be a leader in this area. So by way of kind of just general introduction as to what's happened over the last, let's say, 6 to 8 months. So back in June of 2020, IRIS made a public commitment, a public statement on racism in the geosciences and trying to address the issues, systemic racism and issues that have prevented the geosciences from becoming fully diverse and representative of the whole of our whole population. So we produced a written statement on this, committed to take action in this area, and committed to report publicly on those actions that we take. And you can find the written commitment that we made on the website. There'll be references to the website as we progress here, but you can find that information on the website, that commitment, and also the first of our public reports on what we've been doing. So after making that commitment, one of the things we did was to form a diversity, equity, and inclusion working group. Eventually that we added justice to the name of that. And as many of our peer groups out there in this space have framed that as justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, or, you know, we kind of casually refer to it as the JEDI group. But we formed an initial team. Some of you will remember that we did an all hands meeting late last summer. We encouraged any of you that were interested in participating this to step forward. A number of you did, thank you very much. And we ended up expanding the team out to a total of 9 people. And I'll just read through the names of the people that are on this JEDI team. So Casey Adderholt, Wendy Bohan, Jeff Mathurin, Kristen Poitra, Rhonda Porter, Marlo Swanson, John Tabor, Mary Templeton, and myself. And I'd encourage you, we have a nice representation from across the organization. And I'd encourage you to, as we go through the presentations today, to use the chat function to ask questions, or so we can kind of be accumulating questions as people are presenting. This also has the advantage that if we get to the end of the hour and we haven't been able to address all the questions in our Q&A session at the end, we'll have a record of the questions and we can follow up on those. But I'd also encourage you that if you have comments afterwards, feel free to bring them to me or bring them to any of the people on the JEDI team. And we really would like to hear from people and get your feedback. Okay, so with that, let me just make one more kind of set the stage a little bit more, and then I'll turn it over to the next speaker. So there have been several calls to action that have been published in the geoscience community. And one of these calls to action really resonated for us. And so we decided that as a team and as a corporation, the first thing we would do would be to respond to that call to action, that we would react to that call, and we would identify actions that we could take, and we would start taking action. And I think this really fits IRIS's personality really well. IRIS is an organization where we act, we do things, we do projects, we produce educational materials, we archive data, we distribute data, we run networks, we distribute instruments. Everything we do is about acting and doing. And so I think the fact that our first sort of point of entry into this whole topic is to respond to a call to action by identifying what we can do to have an impact both in the corporation, in our larger IRIS community, and in the geoscience community and the public at large. And so that's what we're going to be talking more about today. I'll stop here. I'll turn it over now to Wendy to kind of set the stage a little more for what we're doing and why this is important.
All right, thank you, Bob. I'm Wendy Bohan. I'm in IRIS headquarters. I'm the Senior Science Communications Specialist. And I just want to go through some of the terminology that we had discussed at the last all hands meeting, just to give everybody a reminder about why this is important and why it's particularly important in the geosciences, geophysics, and seismology. So this is the slide breaking down some of the terms that you hear a lot: equality, equity, and justice. And so we all agree that equality is important. This is where everyone benefits from the same supports, but we know that that's not true equality, right? Because some people don't need those supports. What we're trying to do at IRIS is give everyone the supports that they need to provide equity. And we want to take it one step further and make sure that we can try and address the actual cause of the inequities and remove the systemic barriers that are keeping people from joining our community in science, our community in IRIS. And we also want to make sure that we maintain the talent that we have both in the scientific community and in IRIS. Some of the terms that we didn't talk about yesterday that you may hear as we move forward with this process, trying to improve justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion within IRIS and science, it's the idea of explicit bias and implicit bias. So explicit bias are attitudes and beliefs that we have about people or groups or things on a conscious level. We're fully aware of these things. We can talk about them. We know about them. Implicit bias is something else. Implicit bias is an unconscious attitude that lies below the surface, and it matters because it influences our behaviors. And so the problem with implicit bias is, how do you address and fix something that is unconscious, right? So I would encourage everyone, if you have some time and are curious, to Google Harvard implicit bias tests. This will bring up a whole slew of different ways that you can test different types of implicit bias. And I can tell you it's very enlightening. I recently took one on women in the home and women at work, and I come from a traditional background and I scored terribly. You know, I have very traditional views about women and work. So this is something that I now know about myself and I can take steps to address. So implicit and explicit bias are important, as are microaggressions. So a microaggression is something that happens almost daily. It happens all the time. It can be verbal, it can be behavioral, it can be environmental, and it can be unintentional. The idea here is that these small things communicate hostility, negative prejudicial feelings or beliefs or insults, even if they're not intended to. So this could be something, I'll tell you something that happened today to me that was a microaggression. I was giving a talk, and at the end of the talk, one of the people said, "Yo, you're too pretty to be a scientist." And that sounds like a compliment, but it's not. It made me feel like I wasn't welcome in that space, and maybe my expertise was not as valuable as someone else's. So there's lots of different microaggressions in different spaces, and these small differences really can add up. This is one of those things where it's death by 1,000 cuts. So implicit bias and microaggressions, these are things we're going to start talking about and start trying to address within our IRIS community. Here's some of the ways that these things manifest. So 49% of the STEM workforce are white men, but only 2% of the STEM workforce are Black and Hispanic women. Less than 10% of geoscience PhDs go to recipients of color. Only 69 Black women and 20 Indigenous women have received PhDs in the geosciences in the last 40 years. Women, people from sexual and gender minorities, and Black and Hispanic people all leave the field at higher rates than the average students and practitioners. And so a few months ago, Beth Bartel and I, she was at UNAVCO at the time, we gave a webinar on social justice to 250 people. And we asked them to say or write in the chat one word that they thought described a geoscientist to them. So this is that word cloud. I want you to take a minute and look at what you see. This is the expression of both what we see, our explicit bias, our implicit bias, and it tells us the types of people that we see in this space, the types of people that are currently welcome in this space. And this gives us something to think about in terms of what we want to change. We don't necessarily want to be seen as, beer drinking, drunk field scientists, right? We want to change who's in that space, who's welcome in that space, and kind of the idea of what a scientist is, who can be a scientist, and who is welcome in IRIS as a whole, both our staff and our broader scientific community. We have great, great talent at IRIS. We want everyone to feel welcome and appreciated. So I'm going to move on to the next speakers, Mary and Jeff.
Okay. Thanks, Wendy. Next slide, please. So the IRIS Anti-Racism Action Plan is, as Bob said, our response to the call for a robust anti-racism plan for the geosciences, which was a petition that was posted last summer by some of the geoscientists that Bob acknowledged earlier. Each of 15 calls from that petition is quoted verbatim in our action plan, followed by IRIS's response of how we plan to act. And so when Bob gathered the initial JEDI working group last summer, Casey Adderhold and Wendy Bohan fleshed out this plan with input from the group at that time. Then as the group grew in August after the town hall meeting, the ideas in the plan grew as well. As a living plan, it's intended to continue to evolve as now you, the staff, and later on the broader seismological community add your own contributions to it. And with that introduction, Jeff Materon will talk a little bit about the plan itself.
Next slide, please. Hello all, my name is Jeff Macho. I am the Assistant Controller, and I work at IRIS headquarters with the Financial Services team. Just again, coming back to the action plan as Mary just introduced, as she mentioned, there were 15 calls to action. The plan itself represent 15 specific responses to the action or proposed responses to the actions that we addressed. With one additional, as you read the document, I'm sure most of you have received the document. There's an additional 16 action there that we identified as additional value to the community. The plan itself, we sort of broke it down into 4 broader themes. These actions include actions toward a more equitable, inclusive policies and governance, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of those specific points. really looking at our documents in terms of how we manage the broader coordination of IRIS in the community. The second one is a more inclusive culture. Again, back to retention and feeling, looking into the culture itself, both within IRIS and in the community, understanding our history and influencing the community. Next slide. Now, to execute the action plan, we want to be very intentional. As Bob mentioned, we want to be very intentional and take action in contributing. As we know, IRIS has tremendous talent. We want to leverage all those talents and energies and bring that to bear in terms of executing these actions. From those four broader themes, these are more direct points relative to the action plan itself. So of those 15 action plans, they all align with these broader points, right? So you will see ensuring our policies, our guidelines, our evaluations, the way that we bring people into the tent as it relates to the geoscience community are free of biases, of racist biases toward those underrepresented minoritized groups of people. And you will see action item number 1 in the plan really speaks to that in terms of looking at code of ethics and looking at the bylaws and kind of really be paying attention to some of those guiding governance documents in terms of how they address those issues. Secondly is working diligently to ensure a safe environment that is welcoming, that allows people to feel welcome and hopefully address retention in some of those numbers that Wendy mentioned in her presentation, to make people feel welcome and want to remain or even bring people from other STEM sciences into the community, whether in the field or not. Item number 9 in the plan really addresses workplace culture. So that's one place to look if you want to kind of understand what some of the specific actions around accessibility will be. The third is recognizing the exploitations, harmful impacts historically geoscience have had in certain communities of color, and looking for ways to address them and see how we can improve that going forward. Number 3 in the action plan speaks to building historical resources as reference points for us to understand where we've been and look for ways to avoid repeating some of those impacts and errors in the future. And again, recognizing those ways that the community itself have participating in those activities. And the last is to creating impactful training, creating learning opportunities, and that will allow us to have conversations that we're having today, so people can speak to their experiences and allow other voices to be heard, and do so in a very constructive manner. Next slide, please. And all of that leads to community impact, right? We want to have an impact. We don't want to just talk about these statements and these actions and not go into the execution and actually make an impact on the community. We believe that as seismology grows, we want to add new researchers, broaden the spectrum, add as many voices as we can through collaboration, solving problems with new ways, being able to work with other people of different backgrounds who may or may not have inherent fears of how the community itself works. And then us as a staff, both now and in the future, that we can enjoy a safe, welcoming, inclusive environment. I think you can read the impact that Dr. Rufus Catchings has stated there. He's one of the prominent African-American geoscientists that Bob had introduced me to prior to engaging in this JEDI team. I didn't know anything about Dr. Catchings, but now I do. So I think that alone has been educational to me. So as he says here, regardless of nationality, gender, or ethnic background, geoscientists will be increasingly needed as we enter into a challenging period of human habitation on our small planet as we reach beyond the planet. I think that's a very telling statement. The more voices, I think with all the challenges that we have in this world, this is just one small way for us to create that impact that I think will allow us to move on these issues going forward. With that, I'll pass it back to Mary to kind of explain to you how you can get engaged and really be part of this mission and effort that we're engaged in.
Okay, so to carry that forward, how can we all get involved? And there are at least 2 ways currently. And one is that we really want to hear your ideas and feedback. And to do that, you can email the JEDI working group at jedi@iris.edu. Alternatively, if you go to the JEDI webpage, there's a feedback form there where you can either leave feedback anonymously, or if you choose to include your email address, then it can begin a dialogue with the JEDI working group. Next slide, please. Another way is to be part of the action. So one of the things you can do is, again, go to the JEDI website and sign up to show your interest in one or more action items. And alternatively, you may be recruited to contribute to these actions due to your expertise. So the idea is that when it comes, once we have a sense of who is interested in working on each item and who is missing but needed, IRIS will collaborate with managers to form action groups for these items. There may be a bit of people shuffling in that process. So when it comes to doing this work, we acknowledge that sometimes conversations surrounding race can be uncomfortable.